Welcome to Trust Talk. In this interview with Jeanine Turner, we dive into the world of communication and trust. We begin by exploring how storytelling and mass media shape public trust, especially in global conflicts. Jeanine highlights the essential role of trust in both personal and professional communications, providing insights from key theories in communication studies. The conversation then moves on to the challenges of fake news and media skepticism, examining the vital trust between the public and media. She shares perspectives from her book, Being Present, discussing the impact of digital distractions and advocating for intentional social presence in our technology-driven world. Jeanine offers practical advice for nurturing personal relationships in an era dominated by digital communication and reflects on the future of technology in shaping our interactions. Expect to hear actionable tips for communication professionals to build and maintain trust, emphasizing the importance of evidence, consistency, and clarity. Your host today, Severin DeWitt.
Jeanine, it's a pleasure to have you on our show.
Yeah, wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Shortly, we'll dive into your latest book called Being Present, but first, I'd like to touch on the current tense global situation, such as in Ukraine, Israel, and Hamas. Are there specific communication strategies or tactics employed by either side that might worsen the conflict or obstruct the road to mutual trust, understanding, and ultimately peace?
I think that's a great question about communication and the impact it has, especially in a controversial situation and very emotionally heightened situation that we're talking about in the Middle East. And I think what's really important to think about is the way mass media and mass communication makes it hard for us to connect with audiences in an interpersonal way. On top of that, we have social media platforms that give a perspective around interpersonal connection, but it really isn't, because you don't have a really close connection to an audience. And so what happens is we get kind of sucked into thinking that there's these interpersonal messages that people are sharing because we hear them, but they might not necessarily be directed specifically at me. And so all of these things make for a lot of confusion around communication. On top of that, you have storytelling, where people are trying to tell a specific story based on evidence that matters to them. And they punctuate that story based on the history of that experience. So depending on where you start telling the story around, whether it's the terrorist attacks or when Israel has started bombing, or Israel's done this, or Hamas did this, or Ukraine did this, Russia did this, all of those actions also take place within a larger story. And to the extent to which any story is punctuated, it creates a hero, a villain, a person that loses, a person that gains because of the context. And I think that's what's so problematic, is not understanding the context that another person is building their story from makes it hard to see their side.
First, I'd like to touch on a few key areas in communication that highlight the interplay between trust and communication. So let's explore how these two elements are closely linked. In that regard, how do you define trust in the context of communication, and why is it such a critical component in both personal and professional interactions?
So I think of trust as my belief in the credibility, in the compassion, and the relationship that someone has with me. So I believe that what I think is happening is actually what is happening in another context. And the only way of measuring that, and also the only way of communicating that, is through communication, because my feeling is based on some behavior you've done that communicates to me whether you're being clear, whether you're being consistent, whether you're being compassionate, whether you care about me. And so communication is the mechanism by which trust is developed. And communication is based on both content and relationship dimensions. So whether it's the content you're saying or the relationship you're communicating to me has a direct impact on how I trust you.
Can you walk us through some key theories or models in communication studies that help us understand the role and dynamics of trust?
Absolutely. So I think there's research around audience, understanding your audience, and how to build trust in your connection with your audience. And so a lot of that is related to this idea that communication has both content and relationship dimensions. and that we have to think about creating an authentic relationship with our audience. What that means in terms is like, how do I build credibility as a speaker? And I do that by being very clear in the way I communicate, by being consistent in what I'm saying with the actions that I'm also doing, by seeming compassionate, that I really care about my audience and I'm interested in my audience. Logos, pathos, and ethos that Aristotle's talked about forever, and how we think about communicating connects so well into how we build trust in an audience, whether it's an interpersonal one-on-one audience or it's a mass audience.
In an era of fake news and media skepticism, what role does trust play in the relationship between the public and media outlets?
So I think it makes a huge difference, because what's happening is there's this conversation around fake news or fake, even just the other day I saw an article about visuals and fake visuals, that visuals posted around, even around the war or around conflict, where people think the visual is something that's happening now, but it actually happened 10 years ago. And so the more that people are hearing that they can't trust the news, or that they can't trust pictures that they're seeing, or they can't trust their feeds in social media, then they no longer have a inclination or incentive to pay attention to any specific media outlet. And so then they try to look for things that seem to be true to them, that resonate with what they think. And so it almost creates a more siloed community, because we start thinking, well, I can't trust all the platforms, so I'm going to find the ones that I can trust. The challenge is you might think that the platforms that say the things that you already believe are the ones that you can trust, when maybe they're not the ones you can trust. And so it really creates this dynamic of more and more siloed communication. And we can throw up fake news and, oh, you can't trust the news, you can't trust the media, associated with an entire platform, not even just a story. It makes it harder and harder for us to get messages out, and harder for any new message to come out, because it's now associated with a specific platform as well.
So let's shift our focus to your book, Being Present. What is the central thesis of the book, and why is it crucial for today's digitally saturated society?
What is central to this book is this idea that not only whenever we're engaging with someone, we want to have a conversation or we want to present to them, engage with them in some way, we have to first get their attention. Now, we've always had to get their attention. Again, really, since the time of Aristotle, you have to figure out how to pull your audience in. But since 2007 and the diffusion of the iPhone, we now have to not only try to pull the audience's attention to me, like when I'm trying to talk, I also have to recognize that they have a device that could pull them away at any time. And that's never been the case before. So while they're constantly distracted by the digital device, they could be on it themselves, but someone can also pull them away from the conversation by calling me, which that never happened before. So in 2007, we started seeing this diffusion of digital devices. Then COVID even exacerbated that, where it normalized that I'm going to be in multiple conversations at once because I have to do work and home all at the same time. And so what my book tries to say is we really have to be intentional and thoughtful about how we are socially present with someone else. So presence, we think about mindfulness or being present in the world. I'm thinking about how am I present with you socially in our conversation. So the book provides strategies to think about how can we be socially present with other people. And I have 4 key strategies for that. So that's kind of the key points about it. This idea that the more people are in multi-communicating, engaging in their digital devices, the less they are ever focused on one conversation at a time.
You describe in the book the type of digital distractions people face. How do these impact our ability to be present in both personal and professional contexts?
Okay, so research has really shown that it makes a huge impact, even though we often think that we can be on an email, texting while we're also on a video call. Most of the research on multitasking says we can't do it. Only about 3% of the world are super taskers and can actually be in multiple conversations at once. Actually, multi-communicating, where I'm in a conversation with you on video while I'm also trying to text at the same time, is a much more complex task than just multitasking, being with 2 different tasks. This is much more complex. And so this idea that we think we can do it, we think we can because there's like a brief pause. My mind works 4 to 5 times faster than you can ever speak. your mind works 4 to 5 times faster than I can speak. While you're talking, I'm thinking I can do something else and I can quickly look at my phone. The problem is that has a huge impact on my relationship, because if I see you look at your phone while I'm talking to you, I immediately think you're not listening. If I'm talking to you on a video call, you don't show your video and you say, oh, I'm listening, but I just can't use my video today, I immediately am concerned maybe you're not listening. And presenting to a room full of cameras that are not on is incredibly hard for communicators, because they know people are probably doing other things at the same time. So it has made a huge impact on our ability to engage, build trust, build relationships, and connect with one another.
Your book introduces a new framework for social presence with 4 communication choices. I think you referred briefly to it. Budgeted, entitled, competitive, and invitational, you call it. Can you tell us a bit more about these choices, and could you give examples of when one might be the most effective?
Sure. So I think we have different types of social presence we need. And so these are these 4 types. The first one is budgeted presence. Basically, that's my default mode. I'm multi-communicating. I'm engaging in multiple conversations at once. I'm on my phone while I'm also be on a video call. I'm texting while I might be in a face-to-face conversation. And a lot of time that is okay, because I'm able to be efficient and get a lot of things done. The problem is I might miss some content and miss some relationship. So we basically start at this default budgeted presence state. Then we have to think of, okay, I need to get the attention of my audience. How do I decide what I need to do next? Well, I can say to you, Severin, put all your technology away and just listen to me. Only focus on my conversation. Or I could say, everyone has to come into the office today and listen to my presentation. Or on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're all coming to the office, and then Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we're not. I'm trying to control your social presence. So entitled presence is anytime I'm trying to control someone else's presence. And what we've seen is a pushback. People are like, who are you to take my phone away? Who are you to tell me what to do with my phone? Who are you to tell me to come into the office on Tuesday, right? So the challenge with entitled presence is we're not recognizing potentially the need for the audience. It can work if I have a really important message that you really want to hear and you care about building a relationship with me, and I say, I need you in the office, and I have a lot of status, then it can work. Or maybe I'm in a school situation and all students have to put their phones away. In fact, there's a school in Florida that said that it's helping kids play on the playground because they're being forced to put their phone away. So if you have the credibility or the status, you potentially can do that. But the problem is people might get upset with you, or they might think you don't have that right. The last 2 choices of presence are the ones we really should be focusing on. Competitive is I'm trying to persuade you. And I'm not going to tell you what to do with your device, but I know that that device is going to distract you. So I'm going to do everything I can to influence you, to get your attention, to engage you, and I'm going to be incredibly audience focused to do that so that I can persuade you. So in my thought, we need to be thinking about how can we persuade our audience and focus on that, or second, we need to be an invitational. And what I care about is what invitational is kind of our conversation today. It's a partnership. It's a dialogue. I'm not trying to persuade you of anything. We're trying to have a conversation. And invitational presence, which is really at the fundamental development of trust, in my opinion. It's either I'm trying to build my relationship, I'm trying to connect with you, and I'm going to use that to help with my message, right? That invitational presence is that severe chance of being lost, because the more we're in budgeted presence, multiple conversations at once, the less we will ever be in invitational, where it's just one conversation at a time. Even just the idea of I'm going to focus on one conversation and remove all distractions is becoming less and less common in both younger generations, older generations, interpersonal conversations, larger business conversations.
So what advice do you offer for maintaining meaningful personal relationships in an era where digital communication is predominant?
So I definitely want us to keep in mind that I don't think technology is bad. I think technology can do amazing things for connecting us. And I also don't think face-to-face is the only way to be connected. I mean, we would never get to have this conversation if we had to rely on face-to-face. I do think we need to start being intentional and strategic. So during the day, we need to think about who are the key people in my life that I need to make sure that I'm having invitational conversations with. Maybe there's 3 people at work that I need to make sure I'm building trust with. Maybe there's a couple people at home I need to make sure I'm building trust with. So those conversations, we need to set aside time when I'm not focused on many, many other conversations, but just focused on this other conversation. And that might be over text, that might be over email, that might be over the phone. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not using a digital device. It's just that I'm focusing on just one conversation. And then I have to think about other times when I'm maybe presenting and trying to get an audience's attention, or I'm trying to think about, should I be in budgeted presence right now based on the needs of this relationship? So I think it's really about being strategic and intentional with every conversation that we have.
You just mentioned the technology, and you're right. If we wouldn't have technology, we wouldn't have this conversation, right? So how do you envision the role of technology in communication evolving in the next, let's say, decade? And what implications might this have for social presence?
So I think it kind of ties way back to the conversation that you started with about the challenges around the wars that are going on and fake news. I think with technology advancing, with artificial intelligence and the way it's advancing, that we're going to have less and less of an ability to detect whether we're talking to a real person or not. And as that changes, it reminds me of your conversation about our trust in the media, right? As we begin to not be able to trust whether this conversation is truly with this other person or not, then we have a less and less trust with our connections around us. That's a concern that I have in terms of artificial intelligence, and its ability to mimic conversation in a chat is phenomenal in terms of being communication focused, personal focused, and it's getting better and better. But I think it also can be a real help to us. So if we have technology that's going to help us to keep track of our conversations, keep track of the people in our life, keep track of conversations that we need to be more intentional and focused on, it could maybe help to benefit those relationships. So it's not that it's bad, but it definitely is going to have an impact. And then one other point that I would just make, just in terms of where we're going in terms of digital devices, I think as they become more and more embedded in us, like if you think about a smartwatch, right? That's an easy example, right? It used to be you could put your phone away or turn it off, but you're not going to take your watch off. So as technology becomes more and more embedded in us, if we have glasses, if we have contact lenses, we will almost forget how involved these different conversations are in our everyday life. And my biggest concern is that we're going to stop to value the one-on-one conversation where you're just focused on one other person, because it will be easier for you to not know that I'm getting another message coming in. Right now it's kind of clunky. You can see my phone vibrating, you can hear my phone vibrating. But if it's on my contact lens and you can't even tell, but now I'm thinking about my sister who's texted me or something, you won't see that difference, but I won't be as engaged in the way as I could be. So I think we really have to be thinking about, what does it mean to have full one-on-one conversations with other people, or synchronous conversations and one-on-one with other people.
So where do you see the biggest gaps or future directions in research related to trust and communication?
So I really think right now I'm interested in doing some research on empathy and the role of empathy, and how AI is very effective at communicating empathy. Now, sometimes it seems a little fake because it's using patterns of what empathy should be like. So when you look at chatbots or different AI tools that allow you to have a conversation with it, it sometimes can provide more empathy and connection than maybe a family member might have about a specific topic. So maybe I'm really worried about something and I ask my family member, and they're like, oh, you don't have to worry about that. That's not a big deal. Or don't talk about that. Or quit talking about that. That's stupid. Don't worry about that. Whereas I might say something to an AI chatbot that says, I'm really worried about this issue or disease or this challenge I'm facing. And that chatbot is going to come back and say, I understand your concern. If I was in your place, I might be concerned about that same issue. Here's some things to think about as you're worried about that. So what I'm trying to help us to better understand is, when humans and AI compete with each other for developing relationships, the challenge is that AI has patterns and patterns and patterns of what audiences look for when they are looking for empathy, and can put that in a non-emotional way. Humans always have the emotion of the moment, the stress of the moment, the emotion of the relationship, and then still trying to create that pattern in an authentic way, and they're often not as good at that. So I think looking at that dynamic and how can we make sure that we're still making time for empathy as humans is really critical.
The pandemic, although a tragedy for many, has been a treasure trove for researchers. How have the challenges of maintaining social presence changed or intensified during the pandemic?
So I really appreciate the question about the pandemic because I think it's had huge implications. Because what's happened is the pandemic gave us about 2 years of time where we could work from home and be very efficient with our time and very efficient with our relationships. And so we got used to that efficiency and getting a lot of things done. And relationships take time to develop, and we often don't see the value of this time until later. So relationship development is the marathon, not the sprint. And I think what's challenging about the pandemic is it created this focus on efficiency and task completion. So we're getting a lot of tasks completed, but we're not taking the time to build relationships. And what we don't recognize is a lot of that task completion is because of relationships we established prior to the pandemic. But as we start getting in organizations and getting in relationships that don't have the benefit of that relationship development, maybe we start an organization and we started during the pandemic, so we haven't built those relationships. We don't have the same kind of relationship to kind of back us into. And then the other challenge I think is there's a lot of anxiety around connection and social presence now. I've had undergraduates say that they'd much rather have a class over Zoom, or they hope they could be in an organization where they can only work remotely, or they can't wait for the metaverse where they could just bring their avatar to work and not have to actually meet people in person. And I think what's challenging about that is social presence, one-on-one conversation, and actually physical presence, synchronous presence at the same time. That is hard. I can't control what you're going to say. I can't control what kind of question you're going to ask me. I don't have the same kind of control in a synchronous, same time interaction that I do in a text or an email, or when I'm on my video and I can control my camera. We are getting used to this control in communication, and then we are afraid if we don't have control. And social communication and engagement is like a social muscle that has to be exercised. And as we don't exercise it, we then don't want to do it. So now we're wearing iPods all the time. We are sitting on a bus and not connecting with each other. We are in the workplace and we just go to our Zoom rooms. So we're not open to that opportunity to exercise that social muscle and talk to someone that we might not understand, or talk to someone that feels differently than I do. And so then that just creates less and less connection, more and more isolation. So it's not a surprise that people are feeling alienated, isolated, and alone, because they're creating these environments where they are in fact isolated and alone.
Jeanine, to conclude our interview, what advice would you give to communication professionals such as PR specialists or corporate communicators about maintaining or enhancing trust in their messaging?
I think what's really important is to help people to understand where your evidence is coming from and how you're making the claims that you're making. I think that is critical as we're trying to help people get more literate. Sometimes you see headlines that are making claims and stories that are making claims, and it's very important to connect it back to the evidence that you're talking about. And I think that's in one-on-one conversation, that's another issue of how important it is to connect your claims to your evidence. I think the other thing that I would say is the consistency of your messaging. So the more consistent you are, the more people then see you as credible in your messaging. That's really important in terms of being credible. And also your clarity, in terms of clarity of message. I think that's another important issue in terms of thinking about that. So trying to create, if you have many messages they're trying to communicate and people are overwhelmed already, trying to just focus on one theme at a time can help people to then focus in on your message.
Jeanine, thank you very much for today's talk and being our guest for Trust Talk, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful, this is an incredible topic area to be talking about now and in the future, and really critical for us to be thinking about. So thanks for letting me talk about trust as well.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Trust Talk. We hope that you found the conversation valuable and informative. At Trust Talk, we believe in the power of trust to create positive change in the world. If you believe in our mission, we would greatly appreciate your support. You can help keep Trust Talk going by making a donation on our website at trusttalk.co/donate. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps us to continue bringing you thoughtful and engaging podcasts. Thank you for your support and for listening to Trust Talk. We look forward to meeting you again for future episodes.